Hey everybody, it is Thursday, December 19th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Mununu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, you have regards from the Bidens and the folks at the White House.
I felt like saying yesterday on the podcast, Moshe goes to the White House Christmas party and all I got was this stinking t-shirt or something like that.
Oh, well, no, we brought back White House cookies for you if you want to come claim them in Manhattan.
All right, I'm coming right over. How was it? It looked awesome.
It was great. For those who aren't aware, I was in Washington, took the day off. Jill, thanks for managing the pod yesterday. White House is going back several presidents, will host like a dozen to 24 different parties during holiday season. And they typically will invite, in some cases, donors. Then they'll have a party for congressional staff, White House staff, etc. And then most presidents have done parties where they invite media. Professionals and journalists, etc. I attended a couple of times during my days at CBS and Fox and Bloomberg. And in the last couple of years, the Biden administration has added a creator party. So they invite digital creators from Instagram and TikTok. And so that's what that was yesterday, a couple hours. Get to hang out in the various rooms of the White House. Joe and Jill showed up for a couple minutes. He thanked folks in the room for communicating to the American people in new ways on new platforms. But it was great to connect with some folks, including folks on Instagram, Jill, who I followed. They follow Mo News, and I'd never met in person. So some of you might be familiar with Emily, a.k.a. the Space Gal, who actually just went into space. She was there. And there were a number of other news creators, some folks, Jill, that we had met at the NATO summit over the summer. And so Alex and I made our way down to Washington for about 20 hours, caught up some friends. But Jill, the viral moment we caught with our Mo News iPhone was Hunter Biden and Flava Flav meeting each other for the first time. So they like connect in the cross hall, that red carpeted hall that you sometimes see in various TV shots. And I took a couple photos because I'm like, this is crazy. Like Hunter Biden, Flava Flav, like what could they be talking about? And then my wife Alex is like, Moshe, take video of this. Like, let's see what happens. And so I take video of this and I'm watching it for 2 minutes. And then Hunter is telling his person, you got to give Flava my number. Like we want to connect. Anyway, bottom line, I don't know where the after party was or where those two ended up, but I had posted the video and you might now have seen the video on the New York Post, Fox News, Daily Mail, a whole variety of websites have picked up our footage of Flava Flav and Hunter Biden.
Moshe, it looked awesome. Alex looked great. So did you, but I'll...
No, she you don't have to compliment.
I liked your suit.
Moshe, the suit, I've seen you wear it 10 times. You wear it well.
But very cool, Moshe, and nice that the president is acknowledging content creators.
Yeah. And, I think there's a larger discussion happening. I'm hearing it, especially from Democrats who lost, of, where should we be going? Who should we be talking to connect with as many voters as possible? So that's going to be an ongoing conversation, I think, in the years to come.
Okay, and because it's 2024, the news never stops. Tons of headlines for mid-December. The future of TikTok now in the hands of the Supreme Court, which has fast-tracked the case for mid-January. Yesterday, we reported on the startling number of young people who say that the murder of UnitedHealthcare CEO is, quote, acceptable. Some expert analysis on what's going on with Gen Z and some notes from the Mo News community about what they're seeing.
Including some Gen Zers in the Mo News community who have some thoughts.
In health news, the CDC confirms the first case of severe bird flu in humans.
And it comes as California declares a state of emergency.
A showdown on Capitol Hill. President Trump comes out against Speaker Mike Johnson's spending deal, which brings the U.S. closer to a government shutdown just days before Christmas. On Wall Street, the Federal Reserve cuts interest rates. But what is the Fed signaling about next year? Yeah,
Wall Street's not happy about it.
Paris Hilton's bill to protect minors at residential treatment facilities heads to the president's desk. Overseas, mass graves in Syria show the worst abuses, quote, since the Nazis, according to a top prosecutor. Moshe, to some motor vehicle news. It's not just going to be front seats that have alarms if you're not wearing a seatbelt.
Hey, kids, get those belts on or we're not moving.
Those beeps, the beep.
Oh, God.
It's coming to the back seat. And a flat earther, yes, that still exists, travels to Antarctica to put his theory to the test, only to realize that, you know what? The Earth, not flat after all.
This is real. Jill, we are hearing from folks in the news community who sadly have family members and friends who ascribe to the Earth is flat theory. I like this story for a few reasons I'll explain later in the podcast.
And Moshe has on this day in history.
Your clue today, it's a little bit funny, this feeling inside. And I'm not talking about the bird flu.
All right, some developments when it comes to the future of TikTok in the United States. The Supreme Court announced Wednesday that it will hear arguments on January 10th in TikTok's appeal to block a law that could ban the app in the U.S. The law is known as the Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act, and it requires that TikTok's Chinese parent company ByteDance sell the platform by January 19th, or else face a national ban over concerns about national security risks. TikTok filed its petition 2 days earlier after lower courts ruled that the law could go into effect. The quick action by the Supreme Court makes it clear that the justices do see this case as extremely important. Moshe, TikTok here is arguing that the law violates the First Amendment. The Biden administration and lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, they say that because TikTok is owned by a Chinese company, there are national security concerns because of all of the user data available. There's also concern that the Chinese government could use the app to spread propaganda, which some would argue is already happening to an extent. The U.S. government has also noted that American platforms like Facebook and YouTube, well, they're banned in China, and that TikTok itself isn't even allowed in the country. The court did not block the law while this case moves forward, which some say suggests that it may issue a ruling before the January 19th deadline, which is set by the law.
Yeah, on that note, TikTok, while owned by ByteDance, a Chinese company, ByteDance has a separate app they call Douyin that's actually in China, and they have much more restrictive laws in China when it comes to social media use, especially among kids and the type of content they can see. And so there's been a whole bunch, and we've brought it to you here on this podcast, of criticism, concern about TikTok here. There was that quick move by Congress a year ago to pass that law that surprised even insiders on Capitol Hill, even some folks at TikTok. Overwhelming margins passed that sell or ban law in the House and Senate. Biden signs it. And now we're facing that deadline just a month away here on January 19th. TikTok has been appealing through the courts, was doing their appeal, and the Supreme Court here making this decision to hear this case so suddenly. This is not their normal procedure, meaning even the Supreme Court here sees that this is a big deal and they want to hear it immediately. Interesting, January 19th deadline. That's the day before Trump is inaugurated. We've talked about how Trump has changed his tune on TikTok, that back in the first term, very anti-TikTok, tried to ban TikTok. The court stopped him at the time. Congress learned its lessons. They narrowly wrote this law around national security provisions. And so it's passed so far muster in the courts. But in the interim, Donald Trump has discovered a newfound love for TikTok. In fact, one of his big donors is a huge investor in ByteDance. And despite all of his criticism of China, he thinks that he's got a bigger issue with Meta and some of these other social media companies that banned him in the aftermath of January 6th. And less of an issue with TikTok because, he found a huge following especially among Gen Z men. And TikTok, he was much bigger on TikTok than Kamala Harris or Joe Biden. So he said, I think earlier this week, Jill, I have a soft spot or a warm spot in my heart for TikTok. What he can do is unclear because this is a law, so it requires Congress. And Congress has not changed his mind on TikTok. So it's not an executive order that he can just come in, but there is an enforcement mechanism. So there's going to be a lot that we learn here about the nature of this law, enforcement, etc. In the meantime, the Supreme Court case marked January 10th down. That's going to be huge. Will they issue a stay afterwards and basically not allow that law to go into effect until they write the decision? Will they write the decision very quickly? And how does the 6-3 conservative majority there play, which has been particularly open on free speech issues, but typically backs up the government on a bunch of national security issues? As far as where this would rank in the world, well, we should note that TikTok is banned in the most populous country on earth, India. has banned TikTok for a while. And so the US right now is TikTok's biggest market. 170 million people use it. Jill, there's economic ramifications here. There's people who have built their entire businesses on TikTok. I spoke to them, some of them at that creator party at the White House this week, who are very concerned. They're like, listen, I have 1 million followers on TikTok. It's taken me a long time there. I'm going to have to start from scratch on Instagram or another platform now. And so they're very concerned about it. They've been advocating on behalf of, sort of the entrepreneurs and creators on TikTok here. And, at the end of the day, the big question is going to be, will the Chinese government allow ByteDance to sell TikTok? What aspect of TikTok, if this law was to go into effect, would they actually allow themselves to be banned in America, their biggest market? Or would they sell like the TikTok America part of the company? Would they allow for someone to have access to the algorithm? Would anyone be interested in buying TikTok for billions and billions of dollars without access to that algorithm? Or will China sort of kind of refuse and see how it plays in America? Because one thing the Chinese government likes is chaos in America. And so maybe they want to try the experiment. Like, let's see what happens to America without TikTok. Let's watch them all fight each other. We shall see. So it's going to be, among all the various stories we're watching here, when it comes to the TikTok case over these next 4 weeks, Jill, will be one of the more compelling headlines to watch.
Moshe, Instagram is kind of like Mo News's bread and butter. So we're not really on TikTok as much as we are on Instagram. But just putting ourselves in the shoes of content creators, and even just personally, how much I use, for example, Instagram, I couldn't imagine actually it being banned and taken off the market.
Right. Our business, our top of the funnel, so to speak. Well, we have this podcast and we have another podcast and newsletter. Our biggest audience is on Instagram. So if somehow this was the, reverse scenario where suddenly go back in time 4 years and I decided to start Mo News on TikTok, we'd be freaking out a little bit, right? That's your advertisers, like all of that. And by the way, we should note, we've been messing around with TikTok the last few years. We've got 21,000 followers on the Mo News account there. We spend a lot more time over on Instagram. And I was told many times through the last couple of years, most you're making a big mistake. You got to double down on TikTok. That's where the growth is. And those folks are right. Like we probably would have, 1 million followers if we had taken TikTok very seriously. But, this China story has been going on for a while since Trump's first attempt at the ban. And again, this will have a real world impact. Now, at the same time, like there are legitimate concerns about the Chinese Communist Party having influence over the most influential app in America that is used by young people. And there's clearly intelligence information that led Republicans and Democrats to agree. They don't agree on much, but to agree in the House and Senate in the spring by overwhelming margins on this bill that either requires ByteDance to sell it to a non-Chinese owner, sell TikTok to a non-Chinese owner, or have the apps, Google and the App Store ban the app. So it's something they're taking very seriously. The FBI is warned about this. The CIA is warned about this. Like, listen, this is like the Soviet Union in the 1960s owning CBS, ABC, and NBC. Like that's the ability to influence this. And China views the 21st century as their century. They plan to be the most powerful economy, most powerful country, most influential country in the world. And end the American era that's been going on here for 100 plus years since World War II. And one of their tools here, whether they want to admit it or not, is TikTok. And so this is going to make for again, interesting political allies, interesting political enemies here. We did see that, you saw like Marjorie Taylor Greene and AOC team up against this bill. They don't agree on much, but they're kind of free speech absolutists when it comes to at least TikTok here. So there's a lot more to be said on this, and we'll continue to cover this here as things go to the Supreme Court. January 10th.
Switching gears, the person who allegedly killed healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, Luigi Mangione, will waive extradition and expects to be returned to New York as soon as today. He was initially fighting New York's plan to bring him to the state for murder charges and was fighting to stay in Pennsylvania, where he was arrested and faces minor gun charges. It now appears his short-lived battle is over, and assuming the extradition paperwork is in order, the NYPD would transport Mangione from Pennsylvania to New York today, and he could be arraigned this afternoon in New York. As we've been reporting here on the podcast, the murder of Thompson has sparked tacit approval and even praise from some Americans who have issues with the healthcare industry, particularly young people. Recent polling, as I reported yesterday from Emerson College, shows that 41% of voters aged 18 to 29 found Thompson's killing somewhat or completely acceptable, compared to only 17% of the general population. And comments online and support for Luigi Mangione has drawn condemnation from politicians and law enforcement officials. Here is New York City Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch. She spoke at a press conference this week about Mangione's indictment.
Let me be perfectly clear. In the nearly 2 weeks since Mr. Thompson's killing, we have seen a shocking and appalling celebration of cold-blooded murder. Social media has erupted with praise for this cowardly attack. People ghoulishly plastered posters threatening the other CEOs with an X over Mr. Thompson's picture, as though he was some sort of a sick trophy.
As you heard, those online threats have become real in some cases. Wanted posters targeting other CEOs popped up in New York City after the shooting of Thompson. The NYPD Deputy Commissioner for Counterterrorism said that they've had a torrent of online threats. They've had real-world activity that the police commissioner has flagged, and they say that has caused a lot of concern. Moshe, I know you asked the Mo News community about all of this, and people had a lot to say.
Yeah, we posted that poll, which it's split by age demographic. The question, was the killing of the healthcare CEO acceptable or unacceptable? And you begin at 65 and older, 80-something% unacceptable. And it remains between 60 to 80% unacceptable down to the millennials. And then Gen Z, the 18 to 29-year-olds, is a 41-40 split, acceptable, unacceptable. Put that up, and the messages start to come in. Jill, we've gotten more than 1,000 messages about that story slide from parents of young people, from young people themselves, trying to explain why it is, in particular, that basically anyone born after 1995 feels differently than people born before 1995. Why it's acceptable in the terms of the poll to murder another human being on the streets of New York, why it's acceptable in the words of the poll to murder another human being on the streets of New York because you disagree with the health insurance industry, and they lead one of the major ones. So there's a combo of factors here that we heard from folks. It's a generation that grew up desensitized to gun violence, dozens of school shootings every year, sometimes multiple ones a month. We talked earlier this week about the anniversary of Sandy Hook, that they grew up in a generation where the country watched what took place in Sandy Hook, with a couple of dozen children being killed, and basically nothing was done. They were told thoughts and prayers. They were told wear bulletproof backpacks. They were taught go through drills. There will be no policy changes. Your government is too incompetent to have any real policy changes. So when they see injustices in the world, so I'm told from all the Gen Zers who are messaging, they're not really thinking about policy because government's broken. They want to burn it down. So they're thinking about more drastic measures. On top of that, they're more financially worse off than their parents were. It's always about your generation after generation being better off than the previous generation. It's the reverse now. They look at things like climate change and other things like that. Then they're living in social media. And so they're desensitized to things in general. These are among the factors that people name. So you got technology, you got the experiences they had, etc. Then you have the sort of worldview lens by which many, especially in liberal circles, view the world, the oppressor versus oppressed mindset. You split the world between oppressors and the oppressed. And the so-called oppressors, to take them down, any means possible, justified. It's a bit of what we saw in terms of the defense around Hamas on October 7th, a variety of other things. Take down the man, take down the oppressor, and you got to do whatever you can to take them down. That includes murder. And so you see this in the notes being I don't defend what he does, but I understand. We feel abandoned. The society these days is divided by class. And it's notable because Mangione's rich. His family is multi-millionaires. They own multiple country clubs. But they kind of view him more like a Batman Robin Hood type who, despite coming from privilege, goes against that privilege. And so these are among the various notes that we got from folks. I posted a couple dozen of them on the Instagram slides. We have a highlight right now going. We also spoke to a psychologist, Dr. Lauren. Wait, do you want to jump in here before I talk to the psychologist?
Moshe, I think that you make a great point, and it's something that we've talked about, is that the irony in all of this is that Mangione is kind of like the Nepo baby in this situation, and Brian Thompson is a self-made man.
His dad was a grain elevator operator in Iowa.
But we did decide to talk to an expert about this, psychologist Dr. Lauren Cook. She wrote a book called Generation Anxiety. And we asked her what she makes of young people's reactions. And she said it's part of this larger trend of frustration, disillusionment, and nihilism among young people. Here's a bit of what she had to say.
This is the generation that grew up, seeing Sandy Hook and seeing that happen to people who are their age and has continued throughout the years. I mean, just this year alone, we've had almost 500 mass shootings. Most people know someone who has been affected by gun violence in this country. And quite frankly, not nearly enough has been done about it. So you can understand the anger with that and even the callousness that can come from that, of feeling detached from it. And we're actually seeing a rise in nihilism amongst Gen Z and millennials of, I don't care. It doesn't matter what happens to me or what happens to other people. And when we get to that place, that is quite frankly a very scary place to be, because we are then losing our compassion for other people who are different than us.
So where do you go from here? She says you really need to address Generation Z's frustrations through meaningful dialogue.
Yeah, that you got to acknowledge that this is a tough climate and environment, literally and figuratively, that we're living in. They need to feel validated here. Some of the notes I got is like, one of the issues we have is that we don't really feel that much empathy for the CEO, who's getting his name everywhere. You don't even remember the names of the people who were shot at the school shooting this week in Wisconsin, right? Or the previous shootings, because there's just so many of them. So they don't feel validated. They don't feel they're being listened to. And so they're kind of like, well, I don't feel empathy for that, especially given what we've experienced as a generation here, and the fact that we don't feel great about the future. You've seen some polling among Gen Zers that like 40% of them don't want to have kids because of the way they feel about the world. So there's real issues here, mental health challenges, feelings of hopelessness, etc., that need to be addressed. And that's why we, spend so much time on this poll, because, polls are polls, but there's something to this, right? Seeing this generational difference here. Among some of the other messages that we got, there was a teacher that sent us a message from DC that she says she's seeing an attitude among students that if there's a good reason, violence is okay. Some of them even comparing the killing of the CEO of a health insurance company to taking out a terrorist or taking on Vladimir Putin or Bashar Assad, being like, well, they, are responsible, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, for people dying. So is a big insurance company by denying, certain treatment or medication to people. And that is the sort of moral a plane in which they see it. And so I think that is that's a bit of what you're seeing. You also saw there's a lot of politics at play here. People saying, we're in the Trump era, and there's people saying, well, it's the liberal ideology that is, the issue here among some of the attitudes that you're seeing. Generally speaking, one other issue they brought up was just this feeling of a lack of accountability of corporations. And in an era, somebody noted this, the Supreme Court basically ruling, a decade ago, that corporations are people, that they have a right to free speech. So a younger generation sees the CEO of a company as the company themselves. They don't see a difference. They see companies fall. And so you lose this, dehumanization that's happening here. It's a fascinating conversation. It's an important conversation. It's a concerning conversation. And so we go into it in the newsletter today. We've been going into it on Instagram, and it's certainly something that I know we will continue to follow here.
All right, time for the speed read from NPR. A person in Louisiana has been hospitalized with bird flu, the country's first severe human H5N1 infection, according to the CDC. The CDC said the patient was likely exposed to the virus from a backyard flock, which would mark the first time such a flock has been associated with a bird flu infection in a U.S. resident. A spokesperson for the state health department says the patient is experiencing severe respiratory illness and is in critical condition. It is believed that the individual had exposure to sick or dead birds on their property. The patient is over 65 years old and had underlying medical conditions. Officials did not address more specific questions about the patient's symptoms or the backyard flock.
So we'll wait to hear more details on that, but that sort of reflects the cases we've been seeing so far this year, Jill, the human cases. Right now, there's 61 human cases that have been reported as of December 18th here. Wisconsin officials announced yesterday that they detected an additional probable case in someone who was, again, exposed to infected birds at a commercial poultry operation. So working with many of those birds. So far, importantly, there has been no person-to-person transmission of bird flu. And that's been something they've been worried about for 2 decades here, is that will the virus mutate or change in a way that leads to human-to-human transmission of H5N1 here? Most cases, as we've told you, have been mild. That's why this case is more notable, that it's a severe case. For the most part, earlier cases of people exposed to this who've either been working with dairy cattle or chickens have had pink eye, coughs, and sneezing related to this. Right now, the CDC is still working to characterize the virus's genome, which will help them understand whether it's developed any concerning mutations here. Remember, we lived this with the pandemic, with coronavirus, right? There were mutations, and we had the initial one, and then there was beta and delta, and I've tried to omega. Was there an omega, Jill? Omicron. That's what it was. Omicron.
Yes, the Greek letter that I had never heard of, despite being in a sorority in college.
But and so that's everyone sort of girding here because California announced a public health emergency yesterday, and everyone's like, "Oh God, we're going through this again." We should note the public health emergency, the declaration of the emergency in California, literally gives state and local officials additional means to contain the outbreak, including hiring staff and issuing new contracts. Again, the good thing is not human to human, still chicken to human, or cow to human. This has been circulating widely. At least 120 million chickens have been killed or euthanized in the past 3 years due to the virus. Remember, egg prices had increased for a while. It was partially due to the outbreak there. This spring, things escalated as cows have now gotten it. 16 states have detected it in dairy cows. And research shows that the virus can spread efficiently between mammals. So that was a concern that had gotten into cows. Is it easier to go from cows to humans? We've talked about the raw milk situation. Avoid the raw milk right now because they're finding a lot of the bird flu in the raw milk. It's one of the reasons it's spreading on the farms, etc. So it's a situation that we're watching closely. But so far, again, 60 cases in all of America, and they're all people who work on farms. Not to say, I'm sure we have people who listen to this pod today who might be close to chickens, have those backyard chickens, or who work in agriculture. So, watch out and track your symptoms.
All right, a quick economic headline from CNBC. The Fed on Wednesday lowered its key interest rate by a 0.25 percentage point. It is the third consecutive reduction. But it came with a cautionary tone about fewer additional cuts in coming years. So rates are now back to the level where they were in December of 2022, when rates first started to move higher.
So this was disappointing to the guys on Wall Street. You might have noticed stocks have been down for, I think, 10 straight days, Jill, as of the close on Wednesday. There were hopes for 4 rate cuts next year. They came back and said, listen, we don't like where inflation's at. We're only going to cut interest rates twice in 2025. Not as much as folks on Wall Street were hoping for, because when you cut interest rates, you cheapen borrowing costs. The reason why they're concerned about that over the Fed is that if you cheapen borrowing costs, when people borrow money, there's more cash out there, more cash is being spent, then prices increase because people have more money to spend. So that's the sort of inflation interest rate pendulum that we live on. And so right now, that's where the Fed is at. But you do have a new president named Donald Trump who's coming in there, who has been talking about replacing Jay Powell, the head of the Fed. Notably, he did appoint Powell initially, but Trump is much more about getting involved in this stuff. Presidents, besides Trump, have all sat back and let the Fed do their own thing. So that's going to be something to watch next year. Especially important to Trump is Wall Street and stocks going up.
Speaking of Trump, from CNN, House Majority Leader Steve Scalise confirmed that the current government funding plan is officially scrapped after President-elect Trump came out against it. But Republicans still have not come up with a plan B. Scalise said a new agreement has not been reached, but he did confirm Republicans are discussing how to tie a debt limit increase to government funding in response to Trump's last-minute demands. On Wednesday, the president-elect delivered a message to Capitol Hill that significantly ratcheted up the chances of a government shutdown just before Christmas, while sending the clearest signal yet that he is seeking a dramatic showdown with Democrats over spending. So Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance sharply criticized that original deal to fund the federal government until March 14th. It had been negotiated by Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson. So that undermines support for the plan. The deadline, by the way, is Friday to pass a deal or face a shutdown. Trump and Vance slammed Johnson's bill for including what they see as Democratic priorities, but also injected the politically fraught issue of the U.S. debt limit, which the country's on track to hit after it's reinstated in the new year. So Trump and Vance released this statement saying, quote, Republicans want to support our farmers, pay for disaster relief, and set our country up for success in 2025. The only way to do that is with a temporary funding bill without Democrat giveaways combined with an increase in the debt ceiling. Anything else is a betrayal of our country. And with that, Moshe, let the games and the chaos begin.
Well, it's going to be chaotic. 36 hours here, Jill. They literally came in. So you had Congress. They want to go on Christmas break. They're passing a plan. They have a plan to just let's fund the government through March. We're going to pass some stuff that we need. There's $100 billion in aid to Hurricane Milton and Hurricane Helene folks in the bill. There's money to rebuild that bridge in Baltimore that got knocked down by that container ship. There's a bunch of aid to farmers over drought issues this year. And they fund the government. And Democrats, Republicans get together. They're like, okay, we got a deal here. And then we'll reset in the new year. We got a new president, et cetera. And they thought they had a deal. They did have a deal. And then Trump and Vance walk in yesterday and they're like, blow it up. Elon Musk tweets the world, this thing sucks, and you're giving away a whole bunch of money. Shut down the government. Trump's like, you know what? Let's do it. Mike Johnson, literally the speaker on Friday morning, was asked about it. He's like, I've explained to Elon Musk and company, like, this is the way things going. We're resetting everything. And we'll, guys, we're going to have a fresh start in 2025. Well, it turns out that Speaker Johnson wasn't that convincing, wasn't convincing enough. And so the whole thing has been blown up here. So we might have a partial government shutdown as soon as tomorrow at midnight. We'll see what it means. It's, again, I mentioned, the various disaster aid, economic assistance to farmers, et cetera. And then Trump throws in there, like, also increase the debt ceiling while you're at it, which is a completely separate piece of legislation. And that itself is always controversial. Half of these shutdown watches we've had, Jill, these last couple of years are all related to increasing the debt ceiling. So Trump wants them to increase the debt ceiling on Biden's watch. He doesn't want on his watch, technical thing. Besides that, he wants to come in, sort of save the day here when he's president. And so, the last couple of weeks of Biden having a shutdown, whatever. And that's where we're at. The thing with Johnson, with like a couple seat majorities, he's going to need Democrats anyway. But like in the new Congress, it is so lean that if he loses a couple Republicans, he could go down as speaker if they decide to, toss him out like what they did to Kevin McCarthy, as we covered that. So there's a scramble here happening. You're going to see a lot of chaos on Capitol Hill. We'll have an update for you on this podcast tomorrow and see where they're at. But like many of these deadlines these last couple of years, Jill, it could come down to the wire. We could even see a partial shutdown this weekend and then come back on Monday before Christmas. But look out for a lot of crazy on Capitol Hill and some people having to cancel their vacation plans and flights because they were looking to get out of town today. And they will no longer be able to do that.
From NBC News, a big win for Paris Hilton on Capitol Hill. The reality star has been making a big push for legislation that will mandate reform of the troubled teen industry. The House passed legislation Wednesday meant to help combat the kind of abuse at youth centers that Paris Hilton herself endured as a teen. The measure now goes to President Biden's desk. The Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act cleared the House with an overwhelming majority Wednesday after passing the Senate unanimously last week. The bill's passage comes after years of activism by child welfare advocates and survivors of what's called the troubled teen industry.
Yeah, when you talk troubled teen industry, elder millennials, Gen Xers, you might remember those like segments in Maury Povich and Ricky Lake and Phil Donahue back in the day where parents would like bring their troubled teens in and they would send them off to boot camps and like these camps to like fix their troubled teen. And it wasn't just like from those talk shows, thousands, tens of thousands of kids went to these facilities, whether they're boarding schools, residential treatment facilities, wilderness camps, ranches for kids with emotional and psychological problems. And there were a number of high-profile scandals involving abuses and deaths going back decades here. Paris Hilton herself was sent to one of these facilities by her parents. She testified, and we talked about it on the podcast last year when she testified on Capitol Hill. She was force-fed medications. She was sexually abused by staff. She was violently restrained, dragged down hallways. Terrible things occurred. And so she has made this a big priority for her. She spent a lot of time in Washington the last year and a half looking for legislation here. And so this law will mandate a federal study with a report every 2 years for the next 10 years on the prevalence and scope of child abuse and deaths in these types of programs. They're also going to examine existing regulations, new standards here, and make recommendations for federal oversight. The issue is, for many of these programs, they don't get government funding, so their regulations are set by states in which they operate in, and many have avoided scrutiny due to spotty enforcement, lack of funding in states, legal loopholes, etc. So she's trying to get the feds involved here, and they agreed. The numbers who voted in favor here were overwhelming. So congrats to Paris Hilton, who can add lobbyist here, and author of a congressional bill to her resume. Meanwhile, just before we leave Capitol Hill for the pod, we should note the House Ethics Committee. We talked about that Matt Gaetz report that he resigned from Congress and we might never see the light of day. Well, it turns out they're going to release it. We don't know the vote here, Jill, but it appears that at least one Republican on the committee has joined the Democrats to say, you know what? He might be gone, but we should release this report. The report, notably, Jill, will not be released until the end of the congressional session, which will now not happen until they can figure out a way to keep the government open. So at some point, once they solve that, then the Matt Gaetz report gets released. And of course, we've been looking, for that just of interest he was nominated to be Attorney General. He pulled out partially due to this, but there's some serious allegations against him in there. And so it now appears that one will see the light of day.
From Reuters, a top international war crimes prosecutor said that mass graves uncovered in Syria in the days since President Bashar al-Assad was overthrown are exposing evidence of some of the worst abuses since the Nazis. Stephen Rapp, a former U.S. war crimes ambassador, said more than 100,000 people were tortured and killed in what he called Syria's state-run machinery of death. The announcement came after visiting 2 mass grave sites in 2 towns near Damascus. Rapp led prosecutions at both the Rwanda and Sierra Leone war crimes tribunals and is now working to help document evidence of war crimes in Syria. Hundreds of thousands of political prisoners disappeared into Assad's network of prisons, where many faced torture and death in the years since the civil war in Syria began in 2011, with his brutal crackdown on protests against him. Both he and his father, who died in 2000, have been accused of widespread killings and abuses.
Yeah, the Assad family literally maintained power since the 1970s by often killing thousands, if not tens of thousands of their own citizens. None of this particularly surprising. We've known there's been evidence, public evidence, video evidence out there. Jill, I covered it back on CBS a decade ago of him using gas, Bashar Assad using gas on his own people. His dad did it. In the 80s, it was widely known. But I think the extent of it that they're going to uncover here is remarkable. We've told you about that prison, the Sinai prison, that's been known as a human slaughterhouse. Overcrowded cells, torture, terrible things took place there. People looking for their missing loved ones, some of them reunited, many of them, no evidence of them. And that's why some of these revelations here of mass graves are particularly concerning. Rights groups believe that thousands of others, have been killed in a variety of ways. And so right now, the International Commission of Missing Persons at The Hague, they believe they have already gotten reports of 66 sites of mass graves in Syria. And it's notable here that the International Criminal Court has not officially, Bashar Assad is not a wanted criminal here, even though we've known this for a long time. So we'll see what the world does here. In the meantime, he's in safe hands over there in Moscow. Vladimir Putin has given him asylum.
From the New York Times, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration will require new vehicles to sound a warning if back seat passengers don't use their seatbelts, a rule that will take effect in September of 2027. That means more of the noisy, persistent dings.
Ding, 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 ding. Yes.
Put your seatbelt on.
We will not continue this podcast, Jill, until you put your seatbelt on.
So that is the sound the drivers will hear if they start the ignition before clicking their seatbelt. And to front seat passengers who forget to buckle up. But this new requirement is part of an update to the existing rules for seatbelt reminder systems. Seatbelt use in the back seats consistently lower than that in the front seats.
Yeah, according to the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, front seatbelt use is at 92%. 92% of people buckle up in the front. 82% buckle up in the back. So they're trying to get that number up there by mandating this. You're going to see this roll out here in some newer cars over the next couple of years here. But according to the experts, this has saved a lot of lives. And mandating this in the car ensures that at a time, Jill, we're actually seeing an increase in roadway deaths. They're looking at new mechanisms here to save lives. As we got the numbers down, but now with the rise of like cell phones, distracted driving, that sort of thing, they've been back up again the past decade. So they're hoping that this will be a measure to save some folks, because in particular, if you're in a pretty extensive car wreck, being in that back seat unbelted, you could actually fly pretty far in an accident.
Finally, Moshe, your favorite story of the day from the Daily Mail.
The year.
Ever since the time of the ancient Greeks over 2,000 years ago, human beings have known that the Earth is a globe. Despite this, some people are still convinced that we live on a giant floating disk in space known as flat Earth. Now, one of the internet's most famous flat earthers has finally cottoned onto the truth. Jaron Campanella, who runs the popular Flat Earth YouTube show Jaronism, has traveled to Antarctica as part of a trip dubbed The Final Experiment. He witnessed firsthand that the sun does not set during the Southern Hemisphere summer, which debunks the belief held by flat earthers that Antarctica is an ice wall where the sun rises and sets every day. Stationed in Antarctica, he said to the camera, quote, "Sometimes you are wrong in life, and I thought there was no 24-hour sun. In fact, I was pretty sure of it. And it's a fact. The sun does circle you in the south."
So I appreciate this on multiple levels, Jill. One, it's a break from all the serious news out there. Two, someone with a crazy conspiracy theory who's convinced people of it is proven wrong. And three, he's admitted that he's wrong in an era when many people don't like to reflect on, various theories that they have. And when they're wrong, this guy went all the way to Antarctica. He's been pushing hundreds of videos through the years about the Earth being flat, convinced thousands of people that the Earth is flat. Again, just one large circle, an ice wall that blocks the oceans with the water, so the water doesn't fall off the planet. I haven't gotten deep into this. I know a number of you have questions about the flat earthers. I really, frankly, don't want to spend my time understanding their theory because it's wrong. Anyway, what's notable, Jill, so he notes in the video, he acknowledges, he's like, listen, I was wrong about this. Now, how the Earth is still shaped, I still don't know. I just know it's not flat. So he won't admit yet that the Earth is a sphere, but he will admit that he was wrong about it being flat, and he's going to go back to the drawing board. So that's the deal, right? On our planet, the actual planet, Antarctica is an island on the southernmost part of the world. On flat Earth, Antarctica is an ice wall that encircles the entire world and holds back the world's oceans. I posted a picture on Instagram. People were like shocked by this. I was like, to each their own. There's a lot of people who don't think we ever landed on the moon. There's people with theories and a variety of things. But I will say, Jaron, you went to Antarctica. You found out the truth. You'll get there. You'll acknowledge one day that Earth is a sphere. But I think more importantly, especially to those of you in the community who I know have family members who ascribe to some of these theories. And I got notes, Jill, from people who are like, listen, I got flat earthers in my family, and I sent them this article. This does show you that even the most vehement of believers for the cause, the flat Earth cause, willing to admit in this case, they were wrong. So there is hope out there that you can eventually bring some people back from the brink of flat Earth.
It's funny that you say you didn't really want to get into what he thought was really happening with the Earth, because I felt the same. I was trying to I read 4 times what his theory is, and I'm like, stop. It doesn't make sense. The reason you don't understand it is because it doesn't make sense.
Right, like people are like, well, how does he explain when they fly over the North Pole, between Japan and a flight from New York to Japan, you fly over the North Pole. And I was like, I don't know. I have not asked him this stuff. He explained in this video that he's now wrong about his theory, but I guess they found a way to explain away all this stuff that literally, have you talked to an airline pilot? Have you looked at pictures of the Earth? Have you looked at any satellite picture? It's a sphere, man. But, listen, some people are vehement, but listen, Jaron, he's back closer to our Earth and further away from flat Earth. I want to end here on Round Earth with On This Day in History. On this December 19th, we begin in 1843. Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol was published. The first edition actually sold out by Christmas Eve. And of course, we still read that book 175 years later. On this day in 1988, Bill Clinton was impeached by the Republican-controlled House for perjury and obstruction of justice in connection to his relationship with Monica Lewinsky. In music news, Your Song by Elton John was released on this day. It was actually his first top 10 hit globally. It's been an Elton John week because I watched the documentary on Disney Plus over the weekend. And Jill, prolific those first 10 years, I think like 12 albums or 14 albums in the first 10 years. Remarkable. Elton John, Bernie Taupin, the connection between those two where Bernie writes the lyrics and then Elton comes up with the music. Awesome. And we end with one of our favorites here on the pod. On this date in 1980, 9 to 5 featuring Dolly Parton, Jane Fonda, Lily Tomlin, the film premieres. The song, of course, the famous song, Working 9 to 5. Dolly wrote it for the film, and they owe their title to an organization that was called 9 to 5, which was founded in 1973 about fair pay and equal treatment for women in the workplace. So that was sort of the origin there of the name, but still a classic film, classic song. And speaking of classics, Jill, on this day in 1997, Titanic premiered.
That's right. As I think back on it, I vaguely remember it coming out around this time of year.
This is when the mega movies used to come out this time of year. You know, going into the Oscars, etc. So I'm still trying to replicate that magic. Wicked is still doing pretty well. Or so I see. And Moana too.
All right, Moshe, that is a wrap for us here on this podcast on this Thursday. Thank you for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
See you guys tomorrow.